Hello. Welcome. It's another day, another stream in fascist America. Welcome to whatever this is, an attempt at providing education, advocacy, and a little common sense in this digital wasteland. I'm Aubri Devashrayee. You might be shocked to find out that on the agenda that I have for today, I want to be talking about pet play. I don't have ears. I really want some ears. That's a work in progress. I'm gonna be getting some ears at some point. But I want to be talking about that. But like first and foremost, happy Juneteenth. We need to be advocating for reparations, engaging in reparations if there are people who you know are in need, like obviously not doing this in an offensive manner of paying Black people who are open to this concept, but also engaging in supporting Black businesses, actually using privilege to stand up to racism, that it's not just about paying people, although that is a very significant factor. We are needing reparations in a much larger scale, with the government actually acknowledging the harm that has been done, with the concept of chattel slavery and treating human beings like property that is just disgusting and a blight on our history. That we also need to be using this time to have a larger conversation about reparations in general with stolen land and having reparations for Indigenous people as well. So be an ally in the real sense. Don't be an asshole. Try to engage in ways that actually uses privilege and power in ways that matter to the people around you. So there we go. I want to be talking about the history of Juneteenth. I also want to be talking about singing in like a switch up as well. I haven't done a singing lesson for a little bit, like a dedicated one. So I think I was going to today, and then maybe use an example from like the song Cats to demonstrate some of these concepts. Because sometimes singing is such an interesting activity where it's different than like many types of learning an instrument, where you can have a teacher that kind of like shows you like where to place your fingers with things, and like they demonstrate, and like people can demonstrate technique with them singing, which is like something that I will do a little bit of and have been doing a little bit of, trying to do it in like not an annoying way but an educational way. And but it is very difficult because like it's something you also have to like feel inside your own body, and it can be hard to have that translate with education. So that's just like a natural difficulty when it comes to singing education in general, at least with like more formal singing education. So we'll go over that. We're going to be talking about the soft palate today and go over a couple of exercises. I did show one like a couple weeks ago that I'll probably just revisit. Then we'll get into Culture Corner. There are a few songs that I want to play. I also got this very exciting book at like this antique bookstore, and it's not even really like a full-fledged book per se, but it's on the New York City Ballet, and let's see, when was this published? It's stunning, and I'm shocked I was able to find it at all. It looks like it's from around like the 70s era, though, especially with some of the names that I recognize. But I grew up like in a dance studio where there were a lot of photos of some of these people. And this like photo book is stunning. Just absolutely gorgeous that I want to show. So we'll do that and then get into the reading of the address to the Central Committee of the Communist League, which is this additional part of the Communist Manifesto that is at least included in my edition of it. But yeah. There we go. We'll see if we get to everything, but those are the highlights. So, per usual, I did want to start off with something that's a little more humorous. I saw this came out. Bill Gates invests in new sex trafficking startup. I love this. It is not even really satire, it's just real. So, good on the Onion. I normally, or lately, I've been playing these episodes of like their satirical podcast, true crime podcasts that they've created. And just in order to get to everything that we have going today, I want to play something that's a little bit shorter. So here we go.
Betting big on a consent-free future. Recent filings have revealed that Bill Gates may be doing just that, as the billionaire has reportedly made a significant investment in a new child sex ring startup. The world-leading technologist and philanthropist has invested more than $100 million into a new venture, Preteen Labs, whose mission is to build more sustainable child sex trafficking resources for future generations. ONN Stephen Green has more.
The man who needs no introduction. From Microsoft to the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates has changed the world. An outspoken advocate for awareness on climate change, Gates is now offering his insight and investment to a brand new kind of company. This is Preteen Labs, a child sex trafficking startup that, according to their CEO, Jacob Stoller, is aimed at sustainability.
Cargo ships, private jets, private islands. This is one of the least eco-friendly industries out there, and we hope to change that.
And that's a goal Bill Gates can get behind, to the tune of $100 million, a big investment he believes could make a big impact on trafficking's carbon footprint. But the even bigger question?
So, what is it like having Bill Gates as a boss? Is he pretty hands-off?
Oh, no. He has lots of ideas.
Including widening access networks, eliminating age of consent laws entirely, and installing infrastructure in under-abducted parts of the world. The company already has plans to expand to Africa, South America, and soon maybe even the New York Stock Exchange.
The thing is that this isn't even satire, that's just happening.
It's about more than just making money. It's about our future. And if we fail to act now, our children may never have the opportunity to molest our children's children.
ONN Stephen Green reporting, and the work doesn't stop there for Gates, who is already turning his attention toward his next venture, eradicating sexually transmitted diseases to prevent their spread to any of his future wives. Coming up next, more details on the tragic boating accident that killed America just shy of its 250th birthday. You've seen the news, now touch it with your fingers. To receive your monthly print edition of The Onion, head to membership.theonion.com today. With America's finest news source, the more you pay, the better the news.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Can I just say this is the sidebar? I am proud of my makeup. I also am wanting to get gloves with claws on them. I think this will be a really great addition for the number I'm choreographing. But that again is like a nice to have, not a need to have sort of situation. But it is very uneven as I'm looking in the monitor. This is typical for me, but you know, it's the I guess it's not even really the effort, just like the joy of doing it. That was fun for me. So, okay. This is a video from a channel called The Root, and they have some really great content just on Black history in America, but especially global Black history, and it is from people who actually have personal experience, and so it's not just a bunch of white people like neoliberals that are trying to talk about things they don't understand. Hello, Anarcho Taco. Thank you. How are you doing? We're going to be talking about pet play later. So this is like a, per usual for me, we are talking about a wide variety of topics at the expense of like possibly the possibility of giving people whiplash or even like being disconcerting and maybe even offensive. So whatever. But this is how my mind works. This is what we do here, I guess. But before we get into this, I did want to talk about the history of Juneteenth, and then we'll do a little singing lesson and then get into Pet Play 101. I'm good. Tiny bit hungover. Happy Saturday. Happy Saturday to you. Yeah, it's your Saturday. It's still my Friday. I'm glad you were able to have fun, hopefully, with the drinking. What do your hangovers normally look like? Is it mostly like headaches, or I feel like everyone just experiences them slightly different. Like some people get like super bloated, or like their stomachs just hurt a lot, or they're just very tired, or all of the above, which it may also depend on what you're drinking, when, how long, how many. But for me, it's usually like a headache that I feel in my eyebrows. But this is the video. This is why Juneteenth is important for America. It was published 8 years ago, but they regularly update their content. They post a lot currently. I obviously unsubscribe to them, and they have a lot of really great educational information. It's just hella dehydration for me. Brain too big and dry skull. It's only really red wine. When it's like more sugary. Yeah.
The history books have glorified Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation for freeing slaves. But if we're being real, it only applied to slaves who lived near Union lines, where they could flee his or her plantation or take advantage of opportunities in the North. Around 500,000 Black people managed to do this. These Black people freed themselves. Juneteenth, or June 19th, is a powerful moment in Black history, dating back to June 19, 1865, the day Union soldiers led by Major General Gordon Granger went into Galveston, Texas, with news that the Civil War was over and Texas's 250,000 slaves were now officially free. Yes! 1865? That's a whole 2.5 years after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. In those 2 years, Black people's newfound freedom was rejected by white people. But General Granger bossed up and issued an order to the people of Texas, proclaiming all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. And Juneteenth was born. Our Independence Day. Our July 4th. Of course, it wasn't black and white like that. We weren't free. They just announced it. This new freedom sparked a violent backlash from white people. Surprise! Former Confederate soldiers, still in uniform and with guns, intimidated Black people, continuing a new form of slavery. They did this by murdering, lynching and harassing the freed slaves. Hashtag Reconstruction era. But we are a resilient people. None of their intimidation tactics could stop our ancestors from accepting and celebrating their freedom. And they celebrated defiantly because you know white people were hating. The first public Juneteenth event took place in 1866. Former slaves read the Emancipation Proclamation, something pretty gangster to do in the 1860s South. They also sang spirituals and played games. The freed men and women of Texas took their celebrations wherever they went. Los Angeles, Oakland, Seattle, Chicago, Virginia, you name it. By the 20th century, the Jim Crow laws were in full effect. Freedom started to feel like a foreign concept, and Juneteenth celebrations didn't happen as often. But the fight to freedom had to continue. The Poor People's March of 1968 brought new life into the holiday. In 1980, Texas recognized it as a state holiday. And in 1997, Congress recognized June 19th as Juneteenth Independence Day. It's been over 150 years since the first Juneteenth. Isn't it time Juneteenth became a national holiday? It could be the blackest holiday ever. Barbecues, music, dancing, a celebration of being free Black men and women. June 19th is not just about freedom, but the fight of our ancestors, the determination, and the consideration that one day their children, their children's children, and their children's children's children would be free.
Amazing. I thought it was a federal holiday there as of like 5 years ago. Yeah, I think it was like 4 years ago that it became a federal holiday. It was during the Biden administration. And of course, there were white people who were very upset of like, oh, what? We have this holiday. Imagine being upset about like getting a day off of work. I mean, potentially, not everyone would, but yeah, like so absurd. And that's just like federal recognition, not actually talking about the fact that like Juneteenth, this day, has been celebrated for years and years by Black people. Hello, Tan. Welcome. How are you doing? How was your Friday so far? Okay. I did want to play this from Democracy Now! This was a video that actually came out today. They have some other Juneteenth highlights, but I did want to hear from Clint Smith, especially with this book that he wrote recently. Let's see, what is it called? How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America. Meow, exactly. Hi. We're going to be talking about pet play later, so that's what is going on here.
Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today, a Democracy Now! Special on this, the newly created Juneteenth federal holiday, which marks the end of slavery in the United States. The Juneteenth commemoration dates back to the last days of the Civil War, when Union soldiers landed in Galveston, Texas. It was June 19, 1865, with news that the war had ended and enslaved people learned they were freed. It was 2.5 years after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. In 2021, President Biden signed legislation to make Juneteenth the first new federal holiday since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
Oh no.
The day after Biden signed the legislation, I spoke to the writer and poet Clint Smith, author of How the Word is Passed,
exactly,
with the history of slavery across America. I began by asking him about traveling to Galveston, Texas, and his feelings on Juneteenth becoming.
Things are going all right, you know, just wanting to get some good history in here. Also, celebrate more with pride, but pride in a more like revolutionary manner. So, engaging in that a little bit.
a federal holiday.
As you mentioned, I went to Galveston, Texas. I've been writing this book for 4 years, and I went 2 years ago,
Coffee and
and
an
it was
apple.
marking
I haven't
the
heard the
40th
apple
anniversary
trick.
of when Texas had made Juneteenth a state holiday, and it was the Al Edwards prayer breakfast. The late Al Edwards Sr. is the state legislator, black state legislator, who made possible and advocated for the legislation that turned Juneteenth into a holiday, state holiday in Texas. And so I went in part because I wanted
That
to
sounds
spend
great.
time with people who were the actual descendants of those who had been freed by General Gordon Granger's General Order Number 3. And it was a really remarkable moment because I was in this place, on this island, on this land, with people for whom Juneteenth was not an abstraction. It was not a performance. It was not merely a symbol. It was part of their tradition. It was part of their lineage. It was an heirloom that had been passed down and that had made their lives possible. And so I think I gained a more intimate sense of what that holiday meant. And to sort of broaden out more generally, you spoke to how it was more than 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, and it was an additional 2 months after General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox, effectively ending the Civil War. So it wasn't only 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, it was an additional 2 months after the Civil War was effectively over. And so for me, when I think of Juneteenth, part of what I think about is both the both-andedness of it, that it is this moment in which we mourn the fact that freedom was kept from hundreds of thousands of enslaved people for years and for months after it had been attained by them. And then at the same time, celebrating the end of one of the most egregious things that this country has ever done. And I think what we're experiencing right now is a sort of marathon of cognitive dissonance in the way that is reflective of the Black experience as a whole, because we are in a moment where we have the first new federal holiday in over 40 years, and a moment that is important to celebrate the Juneteenth and to celebrate the end of slavery, and to have it recognized as a national holiday. And at the same time that is happening, we have a state-sanctioned effort across state legislatures across the country that is attempting to prevent teachers from teaching the very thing that helps young people understand the context from which Juneteenth emerges. And so I think that we recognize that as a symbol, Juneteenth is not, that it matters, that it is important, but it is clearly not enough. And I think what the fact that Juneteenth has happened is reflective of a shift in our public consciousness, but also of the work that Black Texans and Black people across this country have done for decades to make this moment possible.
And can you explain more?
Yeah. Like, we shouldn't be giving Biden, Genocide Joe, any credit for this, really. That there has been a long-standing tradition and a lot of organizing and advocacy that has gone into even it reaching the point of becoming a federal holiday, but how it is representative of this larger struggle of like continued liberation, and how we must be showing solidarity in order to have this happen collectively and realize that we can't run from history. We have to acknowledge all of the ills and atrocities that have been done to human beings in order to actually correct these things, like have reparations and have any sort of accountability and responsibility for this so that we can actually provide people what they deserve. But that is a continued conversation in the US of how, like, oh, they're calling it critical race theory, when it's like, it's just history, you dumbass. Apples wake you up way more than coffee. Huh. Interesting. This is the first I've heard of that. Yeah, graveyard shifts are rough. Magnesium. Bisglycinate? Bisglycinate? Yeah, making sure you're hydrated. Hopefully drinking a lot of water. Also, like, pressure point stuff that can be helpful. Like doing this with your hand and like pinching, like finding where it like hurts the most. You pinch like this. Then you do it on both hands. That can also help alleviate a little bit. Yeah, that's a great idea of making your own.
What happened in Galveston in 1865, and even as you point out, what the Emancipation Proclamation actually did 2.5 years before.
Right. So the Emancipation Proclamation is often a widely misunderstood document. So it did not sort of wholesale free the enslaved people throughout the Union. It did not free enslaved people in the Union. In fact, there were several border states that were part of the Union that continued to keep their enslaved laborers, states like Kentucky, states like Delaware, states like Missouri. And what it did was it was a military edict that was attempting to free enslaved people in Confederate territory. But the only way that that edict would be enforced is if Union soldiers went and took that territory. And so part of what many enslavers realized, right, and realized correctly, was that Texas would be one of the last frontiers that Union soldiers would be able to come in and enforce the Emancipation Proclamation, if they ever made it there in the first place, because this was 2 years prior to the end of the Civil War.
You do that
and so you
throughout
had
the day.
enslavers from Virginia and from
You already know.
North Carolina and from all of these states
You're
in
on
the
top
Upper
of it.
South who brought their enslaved laborers and relocated to Texas in ways that increased the population of enslaved people in Texas by the tens of thousands. And so when Gordon Granger comes to Texas, he is making clear and letting people know that the Emancipation Proclamation had been enacted in ways that, because of the topography of Texas and because of how spread out and rural and far apart from different ecosystems of information many people were, a lot of enslaved people didn't know that the Emancipation Proclamation had happened. And some didn't even know that General Lee had surrendered at Appomattox 2 months prior. And so part of what this is doing is making clear to the 250,000 enslaved people in Texas that they had actually been granted freedom 2.5 years prior, and that the war that this was all fought over had ended 2 months before.
During the ceremony making Juneteenth a federal holiday, President Biden got down on his knee to greet Opal Lee, the 94-year-old activist known as the grandmother of Juneteenth. This is Biden speaking about Lee.
Yeah,
As a
him getting
child
down
growing up
on
in
his knee,
Texas,
this is just like some
she and her
performative
family,
bullshit.
would celebrate Juneteenth.
Because guess what? He was part of this, what is his name? Thurmer, this guy. Strom Thurmond, that's who his name was, of like being so against the Voting Rights Act, being pro Jim Crow laws, that like he worked very regularly with Strom Thurmond. And so like he has already done so much fucking harm, and that like a lot of this is just bullshit.
On Juneteenth, 1939, when she was 12 years old, a white mob torched her family home. But such hate never stopped her, any more than it stopped the vast majority of you I'm looking at from this podium. Over the course of decades, she's made it her mission to see that this day came. It was almost a singular mission. She's walked for miles and miles, literally and figuratively, to bring attention to Juneteenth, to make this day possible.
And this is Opal Lee speaking at Harvard School of Public Health.
I don't want people to think Juneteenth is just one day. There is too much educational components. We have too much to do. I even advocate that we do Juneteenth, that we celebrate freedom from the 19th of June to the 4th of July. Because we were free on the 4th of July, 1776. That would be celebrating freedom. You understand? If we were able to do that.
That's something, I mean, not to be interrupting a lot, but like, that's something that Frederick Douglass, he was asked by like this women's rights group. Of course, it was these white feminists, like this group that asked him to speak about freedom on the 4th of July at one point, and that he was like, this is offensive to me. Frederick Douglass, who achieved his own freedom, and he was like, this is a day for you. This is not a day for everyone else, because not everyone else is free. It's offensive. And of course, like, the people there were very displeased, but like, that needed to be said. And yeah, that just like goes to show like that reference that she was making of like people not being free on July 4th. That's like one of the more like famous speeches on that. Last time I gagged so bad I saw flashing lights on it. Oh. Like Aura with your headache. That is so brutal. A bad mushroom trip. Doobies are not legal in Utah. But there is medical marijuana that people apply for, that you can apply for. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And that is Opal Lee, considered the grandmother of Juneteenth. And Clint, one of the things you do in your book is you introduce us to grassroots activists. This doesn't come from the top. This comes from years of organizing, as you point out, in Galveston itself, and with people like, not that there's anyone like Opal Lee.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Part of what this book is doing, it is an attempt to uplift the stories of people who don't often get the attention that they deserve in how they shape the historical record. So that means the public historians who work at these historical sites and plantations. That means the museum curators. That means the activists and the organizers, people like Take 'em Down NOLA in New Orleans, who pushed the city council and the mayor to make possible the fact that in 2017 these statues would come down, several Confederate statues in my hometown in New Orleans. And part of when I think about someone like Miss Opal Lee, part of what I think about is our proximity to this period of history, right? Slavery existed for 250 years in this country and has only not existed for 150. And, you know, the way that I was taught about slavery growing up in elementary school, we were made to feel as if it was something that happened in the Jurassic Age, that it was the Flintstones, the dinosaurs, and slavery, almost as if they all happened at the same time. But the woman who opened the National Museum of African American History and Culture alongside the Obama family in 2016 was the daughter of an enslaved person, not the granddaughter or the great-granddaughter or the great-great-granddaughter. The daughter of an enslaved person is who opened this museum, the Smithsonian, in 2016. And so there's clearly, for so many people, there are people who are alive today who were raised by, who knew, who were in community with, who loved, people who were born into intergenerational chattel bondage. And so this history that we tell ourselves was a long time ago wasn't in fact that long ago at all. And part of what so many activists and grassroots public historians and organizers across this country recognize is that if we don't fully understand and account for this history that actually wasn't that long ago, that in the scope of human history was only just yesterday, then we won't fully understand how our contemporary landscape of inequality today. We won't understand how slavery shaped the political, economic, and social infrastructure of this country. And when you have a more acute understanding of how slavery shaped the infrastructure of this country, then you're able to more effectively look around you and see how the reason one community looks one way and another community looks another way is not because of the people in those communities, but is it because of what has been done to those communities generation after generation after generation. And I think that is central to the sort of public pedagogy that so many of these activists and organizers who have been attempting to make Juneteenth a holiday and bring attention to it as an entry point to think more wholly and honestly about the legacy of slavery have been doing.
During an interview on CNN, Democratic Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez called out the 14 Republican Congress members, all white men, who voted against making Juneteenth a federal holiday.
This is pretty consistent with, I think, the Republican base, and it's whether it's trying to fight against teaching basic history around racism and the role of racism in U.S. history to, there's a direct through line from that to denying Juneteenth.
Yeah, exactly. And then trying to claim like these Confederate statues, all of these racist institutions, and like what is upheld as culture, or like what kind of history is being told, is that people are like, well, that's my ancestry. It's like, okay, so how about other people have ancestry as well? And guess what? Your ancestors did some shitty things. As someone who is the product of colonizers and the colonized, but even with my own family being colonized, that like being Brahmin, that they have directly oppressed other people with the caste system and benefit from the oppression. That's like, that does not mean that that you then get in your feelings and say like, oh, I don't want to acknowledge all of this stuff that I've benefited from, that like historically my family has benefited from all of these systems of oppression. You know what that means? It means that we have a duty to actually be talking about this and working towards collective liberation, and actually having that accountability now, and working with people and having it so that we are uplifting people so that they are seen, rather than like coming in with these savior complexes, so that we are doing things in the right way. Like, it's an opportunity to correct what has happened historically. Like, that should be looked at as a duty. Slavery in private prisons with racialized policing and mandatory sentencing isn't 150 years ago. Yep, it still happens. Exactly. So talking about like the vestiges of these institutions, that it's like that slavery just transformed into the for-profit private prison complex, that disproportionately there are people of color who are imprisoned, but predominantly Black people, and that like this is unacceptable. This should be unacceptable to all of us, and that like we need to abolish the police. We shouldn't be in a police state. We need to have reparations for people so that like communities can build and actually have resources going towards human beings that have been kept from them for so long. But like, that's not just like, that's why we're having the conversation of like Juneteenth not just being like, oh, it's a holiday, yay. Like, we need to be engaging in reparations in our everyday lives, of like, if there are people and mutual aid groups that like we can be giving some funds to, and also like having even more dedication towards liberation and what that means, and like actually listening to people who know about this.
Day that is widely recognized and celebrated as a symbolic kind of day to represent the end of slavery in the United States.
If you could respond to that, Clint Smith, and also the fact that on the same day yesterday, the Senate Minority Leader said they would not be supporting the For the People Act, the Voting Rights Act.
Absolutely. I think very clearly the critical race theory, the idea of it is being used as a boogeyman, and it is being misrepresented and distorted by people who don't even know what critical race theory is, right? So we should be clear that the thing that people are calling
because they're ignorant and dumb
is just, that is the language that they are using to talk about the idea of teaching any sort of history that rejects the idea that America is a singularly exceptional place, and that we should not account.
Yeah, even me snapping, like that concept of like, this is a concept that has come from ballroom a lot of the time, like slam poetry, that these are spaces and cultures that have been created as safe places by Black people specifically, and like even using a fan, like that's been popularized in queer culture, at least in the Western world, that like this is something that has been used in ballroom historically, that has also been taken from queer spaces in like Asian countries as well. So actually talking about the origins of things is very important. I'm quieter on these subjects as it's not my voice that needs to be heard, but it's kind of fucked up to be white and benefit from supremacy, but I have an Irish name and zero connection to past culture, and Crown decimated my connection to culture, and now I aesthetically symbolize that power structure despite being harmed by it. Yeah, and like I think that's a good perspective to have of like understanding like, yeah, it's good for us to be listening, and like I shouldn't be interrupting as much. Like that's real. I'll shut up. But also like holding that nuance of like there are systems that hurt many people, hurt many kinds of people, but that they are also built to further marginalize certain groups of people even more.
For the history of harm that has been enacted to create opportunities in intergenerational wealth for millions of people that has come at the direct expense of millions and millions of other people across generations. And so part of what is happening in these state legislatures across the country, and with regard to the effort to push back against teaching of history, 1619 Project, critical race theory, and the like, is a recognition that we have developed in this country a more sophisticated understanding, a more sophisticated framework, a more sophisticated public lexicon with which to understand how slavery, how racism was not just an interpersonal phenomenon, it was a historic one. It was a structural one. It was a systemic one.
I want you to talk more about your book, How the Word is Passed, a reckoning with the history of slavery across America. Can you talk about the journey you took? You were just mentioning where you grew up in Louisiana, the map of the streets of Louisiana, and why you feel it is so critical not only to look at the South, but your chapter on New York is something that people will be, many will be, shocked by. The level of, when people talk about the South and slavery, that New York, of course, had enslaved people.
It did. It was really important for me to include a chapter on New York City and a place in the North more broadly, in part because, while the majority of places I visit are in the South, because the South is where slavery was saturated and where it was most intimately tied to the social and economic infrastructure of that society, it most certainly also existed in the North. What a lot of people don't know is that New York City, for an extended period of time, was the second largest slave port in the country after Charleston, South Carolina. That in 1860, on the brink of the Civil War, when South Carolina was about to secede from the Union after the election of Abraham Lincoln, that New York City's mayor, Fernando Wood, proposed that New York City should also secede from the Union alongside the southern states because New York's financial, political, and political infrastructure were so deeply entangled and tied to the slaveocracy of the South. Also that the Statue of Liberty was originally conceived by Edouard de la Boulaye, a French abolitionist who conceived of the idea of the Statue of Liberty and giving it to the United States as a gift, that it was originally conceived as an idea to celebrate the end of the Civil War and to celebrate abolition.
Hey, I didn't know that.
Over time, that meaning has been, even through the conception of the statue, right? The original conception of the statue actually had Lady Liberty breaking shackles, like a pair of broken shackles on her wrist to symbolize the end of slavery. And over time...
I didn't know that he was an abolitionist. I know that it was received after the Civil War. But again, like, especially with this American education that is incredibly racist and upholding white supremacy and all of these systems that support it, like, so disappointing to not know that, but incredible.
It became very clear that that would not have the sort of wide mainstream support of people across the country. Obviously, this having been just not too long after the end of the Civil War, so there were still a lot of fresh wounds. And so they shifted the meaning of the statue to be more about a sort of inclusivity, more about the American experience, the American project, the American promise, the promise of democracy, and sort of obfuscated the original meaning to the point where even the design changed. And so they replaced the shackles with a tablet and the torch, and then put the shackles very subtly, sort of underneath her robe. And but the only way you can see them, these broken chains, these broken links, are from a helicopter or from an airplane. And in many ways, I think that is a microcosm for how we hide the story of slavery across this country, that these chain links are hidden out of sight, out of view of most people, from on under the robe of Lady Liberty, and how the story of slavery across this country is very, as we see now, very intentionally trying to be hidden and kept from so many people, so that we have a fundamentally inconsistent understanding of the way that slavery shaped our contemporary society today.
Clint, before we end, you are an author, you're a writer, you're a teacher, and you are a poet. Can you share a poem with us?
I'd be happy to. And so when you're a poet writing nonfiction, that very much animates the way that I approach the text. And so this is this is an adaptation or an excerpt from the end of one of my chapters that originally began as a poem that I wrote when I was trying to think about some of these issues that I brought up. Growing up, the iconography of the Confederacy was an ever-present fixture of my daily life. Every day on the way to school, I passed a statue of P.G.T. Beauregard riding on horseback, his Confederate uniform slung over his shoulder, and his military cap pulled far down over his eyes. As a child, I did not know who P.G.T. Beauregard was. I did not know he was the man who ordered the first attack that opened the Civil War. I did not know he was one of the architects who designed the Confederate battle flag. I did not know he led an army predicated on maintaining the institution of slavery. What I knew is that he looked like so many of the other statues that ornamented the edges of this city, these copper garlands of a past that saw truth as something that should be buried underground and silenced by the soil. After the war, the sons and daughters of the Confederacy reshaped the contours of treason into something they could name as honorable. We called it the lost cause, and it crept its way into textbooks that attempted to cover up a crime that was still unfolding. They told us that Robert E. Lee was an honorable man, guilty of nothing but fighting for the state and the people that he loved, that the Southern flag was about heritage and remembering those slain fighting to preserve their way of life. But see, the thing about the lost cause is that it's only lost if you're not actually looking. The thing about heritage is that it's a word that also means I'm ignoring what we did to you. I was taught the Civil War wasn't about slavery, but I was never taught how the declarations of Confederate secession had the promise of human bondage carved into its stone. I was taught the war was about economics, but I was never taught that in 1860, the 4 million enslaved Black people were worth more than every bank, factory, and railroad combined. I was taught that the Civil War was about states' rights, but I was never taught how the Fugitive Slave Act could care less about a border and spell Georgia and Massachusetts the exact same way. It's easy to look at a flag and call it heritage when you don't see the Black bodies buried behind it. It's easy to look at a statue and call it history when you ignore the laws written in its wake. I come from a city abounding with statues of white men on pedestals and Black children playing beneath them, where we played trumpets and trombones to drown out the Dixie song that still whistled in the wind. In New Orleans, there are over 100 schools, roads, and buildings named for Confederates and slaveholders. Every day, Black children walk into buildings named after people who never wanted them to be there. Every time I would return home, I would drive on streets named for those who would have wanted me in chains, go straight for 2 miles on Robert E. Lee, take a left on Jefferson Davis, make the first right on Claiborne. Translation, go straight for 2 miles on the general who slaughtered hundreds of Black soldiers who were trying to surrender, take a left on the president of the Confederacy who made the torture of Black bodies the cornerstone of his new nation, make the first right on the man who permitted the heads of rebelling slaves to be put on stakes and spread across the city in order to prevent the others from getting any ideas. What name is there for this sort of violence? What do you call it when the road you walk on is named for those who imagined you under a noose? What do you call it when the roof over your head is named after people who would have wanted the bricks to crush you?
Clint Smith, author of the book How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America. Speaking on Democracy Now! In 2021, the day after Juneteenth became a federal holiday. Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and...
So powerful. So just to continue this conversation about reparations, the need for not only dismantling these systems that are inherently oppressive, but also advocating for programs and just communities, like community resources that are needed for people to rebuild. Reconstruction that was a complete farce. And how, of course, the freedmen, the people who were formerly enslaved, were not recipients of this, of the 40 acres and a mule. So this happened recently. Ghana pushes for concrete slavery reparations after UN resolution. So this has been a conversation happening in the UN for a while, and not like we are expecting, this institution to be providing collective liberation in many ways, especially with like all of the concessions on human rights that have historically been made by this body. But it is a good thing to be talking about, and that, yes, reparations should be pursued.
This is the first high-profile conference Ghana is hosting following the landmark United Nations resolution on reparations for the transatlantic slave trade. While many UN member states backed the resolution nearly 3 months ago, campaigners say implementation is what truly matters, and that is what Ghana is now pushing ahead. Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama hopes this gathering will help develop a comprehensive roadmap to ensure the resolution delivers meaningful results.
Future generations will judge us not by the resolutions we adopted, but by the progress we achieve. And so let them say that in Accra we chose truth over denial. Let them say that in Accra we chose partnership over indifference. And let them say that in Accra we chose justice over delay. And let them say that when history called upon our generation to act, we stood up and we answered with courage.
Dubbed the Next Steps Conference on Reparatory Justice, delegates here have been discussing objectives, including the establishment of international panels on reparatory justice and restitution. They also want to turn this political momentum into an institutional commitment for reparatory justice. Expectations remain high among delegates from more than 80 countries that the Accra conference could help move the goal forward.
Well, I think a very strong framework has been developed, but it will take courage and it will take time. The slave trade happened over several centuries. We're still dealing with its impact, and hopefully we can bring about the restorative justice that our ancestors and their descendants require.
It's ours, and it's ours for the taking. So hopefully that this gathering, it's not the first, it's not the last, but it's an awakening, and I think the more that we have these occasions, it's going to happen for us.
Activists are also using their platforms to remind the world of the lasting impact of slavery.
Slavery is not only about the past. And if you look at this installation, the past is dead. So we are talking about the present now. We are talking about liberation, of the mind, of our soul, of our thoughts, and our intellect, everything, And so I think it is a very good way of communicating with people, with the public, with even the upcoming children and the unborn ancestors on how we can claim our culture, our heritage, and our authenticity back.
The transatlantic slave trade lasted about 400 years, and while momentum around the global reparations appears to be building, at least from the conference, the journey towards realizing these goals may still take time. Isaac Kaleji, TRT World, Accra.
Okay. Yeah, we need to be pursuing reparations globally to any lands and people who have been harmed not only by the sin and atrocity of slavery, but also of colonization. Like, as You mentioned Anarcho Taco, that like there are people who have suffered under these colonial empires, and how like as part of our collective liberation we must be advocating for all of these things for these groups of people. Okay, shall we get into our singing lesson for today? So I wanted to talk about, I know this is shifting gears, but in an effort to provide more education that is not gate kept, especially with these like very classist systems of education and having these monetary exclusions for people, let's democratize this knowledge. So this is a little bit of more of my formal singing education that I have had the privilege of being able to participate in the university system and otherwise. So today I wanted to focus on, like, I like to be talking about some of the anatomy of singing, how our bodies, as many singing teachers say, are our instrument. And it can be like an annoying and kind of seems like it's a trite thing to say, or like I think especially people who are involved in singing and performing and like theater and stuff, it can be like something that we say as a joke of like, what are you doing to your instrument? But it is true that like how you are using your body, like this obviously affects how you sing, because that is how you actually create sound and then actually manipulate sound. So as part of this engaging with the physiology of it all, we're going to be talking about the anatomy of the palate, which is the soft palate especially, but our palate in general that we have in our mouth. There is the hard palate. If you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, that like bony part that's hard and rigid, has ridges, that is your hard palate. And there is bone in there, and then when you have your tongue go further back, or it gets like a little bit tickly and softer and squishier, that is the soft palate. And it is it has these muscle fibers that are associated, and you can actually manipulate that, of lifting it, lowering it. The concept of snoring, a lot of the time, like this isn't exclusive to this phenomenon, but it usually means like the soft palate in back is lowered, and so it's inhibiting air from actually going through. Head voice and chest voice, yeah, that is a phenomenon that I do want to be, I think maybe we're going to be talking more about that next week, of like transitioning from your head voice and your chest voice. So whether you are like speaking in a way that's like higher in your register or lower in your register, like the in-between part of like switching between your chest voice and your head voice, that's usually where people can have like their voices crack. That's called like the break in your voice, or your passaggio is the Italian term for it specifically. But I did want to show this article written by Christian Kulkarni. The palate, also known as the roof of the mouth, forms a division between the nasal and oral cavities. It is separated into two distinct parts. So as we were talking about the hard palate, this is the bony part that has ridges in it, and then the soft palate. When you are lifting your soft palate a lot, like you can make yourself yawn, if you've ever done that before. When I would teach private singing lessons, especially to like younger kids, that is how I would like help them kind of discover what that felt like, of like, can you make yourself yawn, where you go like, oh, like that is you lifting your soft palate. The soft palate is comprised of muscle fibers, like I was saying, and it is covered with a mucous membrane. So how it has like more moisture that is there. I mean, if you've had a full night of drinking, it might not be as moist as other times. Just dehydration in general, which is why there's like this phrase in singing for a lot of people. They say like, sing right, pee white, meaning like you are peeing clear because you are hydrated enough, because water is so important in actually accessing, like having your vocal cords be moisturized, but also your soft palate. All of it is affected. So your soft palate can be elevated to close the pharyngeal isthmus during swallowing. This prevents the food bolus from entering the nasopharynx. In this article, we will look at the anatomy of the palate, its structure, function, and neurovascular supply. So this is like more of a 3D interaction. This might be scary. Okay. Maybe we're saved some of the like body horror there. I am very affected by body horror. And I don't know if it's because, like, especially being a trans person, I just always, and this is also indicative of me being on like the ACE spectrum of like bodies can be freaky. Bodies, like your own body can sometimes be like a nightmare. You know what I mean? And other people's bodies. They can be beautiful, but also like very fear-inducing, anxiety-inducing. Anyway, so we read that with the structure divides the nasal cavity, the oral cavity, with the hard palate positioned anteriorly and the soft palate posteriorly. So like the hard palate being forward, just talking in layman's terms, because they're talking like academics, and soft palate is in back. So it forms both the roof of the mouth and the floor of the nasal cavity. So the superior aspect of the palate, the nasal cavity, the respiratory epithelium, inferiorly aspect of palate, oral cavity. So here we can see this little demonstration. This is the mouth, like your oral cavity here, your soft palate is in back, your hard palate is right where your teeth are. Your nose, like this is your nasal cavity that you have air go up through your mouth and into your nose, the nasopharynx. Your sinuses are all extremely connected. So that's why like sometimes, like there was one time I was younger and I like slipped or something, and or like my hand slipped and I like accidentally like jabbed my throat when I was brushing my teeth, and it like made my whole like tonsil swell up super huge, and it made it so that like my nose was hurting. I felt it in my ear, even like my eye was like swollen, because it's all very connected. Okay. I mean, I know we're talking about the anatomy, but sometimes I feel like some of this is more helpful than others. So we'll stick with what we've been talking about as 4, because I don't think this is as necessary to know these specific terms, just to simplify things a little bit. There was this. Okay, this is what I wanted to get to. Vasculature. The palate receives arterial supply primarily from the greater palatine arteries, which run anteriorly from the greater palatine foramen. In addition, the anastomosis, between the lesser palatine artery and ascending palatine artery provide collateral supply to the palate. So essentially just saying like, this is how you're getting blood and air to all of these various areas in order for them to be working. Okay, I thought there was something else on here that I was wanting to go over, but anyway. Now that we have like a basic of the anatomy because we aren't going into dentistry. Just to keep things a little bit more simple. A couple weeks ago, I was showing a vocal exercise that really helps with lifting your soft palate. So if you can go like, oh, like you're talking like you're a very pretentious person, like, oh, then you're lifting your soft palate. There is this exercise that is like a siren that people do. So you go from like the lowest part of your register to the highest part of your register, and then you're working through your passaggio, which is the break in your voice going from your chest voice to your head voice. So like you go into your vocal fry, which is like the lower part of your register. So like, it was catching at the top for me. That is indicative of me not being warmed up. That's okay. That's part of the exercise. So I'll do that again. I don't know if you could hear like the flip of me going into my chest voice more, but something that is really helpful with learning how to access this, just this phenomenon, getting more used to it of like lifting, is like singing songs or just like the melody of something as you're like learning the notes to a song, especially just going on like an ooh or an ah. Oohs usually require more air, so that can be good because it's a little more focused. Ahs allow you to get a little bit higher with your singing. So I think some was noise gated by the mic. I think you're right too. This happens with a lot of the exercises. I need to figure that out. Especially as I like am doing more like representations of like classical singing, that really fucks up the mic. It like doesn't know what to do. I like blow that shit out. But I can also send like after the stream, like in the Discord, some references to people doing this siren sound to help warm up. There's this singing exercise, and I need to figure out how to get like a piano set up or something that I can be like, okay, let's go up these scales and do something. But this helps you to like get your like tongue a little bit looser, and also to access like working with your hard palate, which is how you make these more like your consonants for things a lot of the time. And then also going up and lifting with your soft palate. A good rule with singing is that like you should never be trying to lift your soft palate as you're reaching a note. You should always be preparing so that your soft palate is lifted to the place that you need it to be before you start singing where you're needing it to be, especially if you're singing very high or low. I'm really good at vocal mimicry, but cannot hold a tune. I think if you can mimic, you can probably hold a tune. I think more people can sing than what they realize. On one hand, I'm like, there's so many people who are like claim to be singers, mostly like the capitalists that are making a ton of money from it, that I can be extremely critical of. Like, for example, I like do not think Taylor Swift is a vocalist at all. I've never thought this, or I've always thought that thought. I've never thought that she was a vocalist, especially growing up in Utah where there are a lot of like white blonde women who don't flavor their food. They are obsessed with her, and I never have been, and that was like a huge source of ire with many people towards me. And I'm like, I don't care. She's boring to me. Anyway, she's catching strays, but I don't care. But I think we all have more of a capacity for singing than what we think. But I just get annoyed when there are certain people who are revered for being like vocalists and they haven't necessarily earned it, or there are many more people who are extremely talented that just are not getting the credit that they are due. I had a lisp as a kid. I'd put on accents to talk around it. No vocoder needed. Wow, that is such a creative way of going about that. I love that. Good for you. I mean, not like like a lisp is something to be like gotten rid of, but I'm sure like that was more comfortable for you just existing in the world that we live in. But that is a lot of creativity. I love that. Okay, so this singing exercise is just going on a D and an ah. So D helps get your tongue to go like very snappy against your hard palate, and then the ah helps you lift your soft palate, so it makes your tongue kind of go like up from your soft, go up to touch your hard palate, so D, and then it has to go back down for the ah. So it helps like make sure that your tongue is a little more relaxed and warmed up even, which is a weird thing to be talking about, but like that's just the nature of what we do here and what happens in singing. So you start lower, like D, D, I'm a little bit pitchy. D, It's also a really good exercise to practice your breath control, like those hisses that we were previously talking about in a different lesson. You can definitely feel your diaphragm engaging in a very similar manner. So then with that type of exercise, you just go up the scale, you go back down the scale to warm up all parts of your voice. To give an example, maybe I'll do something from Cats. Just to show you a difference of like me not anticipating having to lift my soft palate in certain ways, especially. Midnight, not a sound from the pavement, as the moon lost her memory, she is smiling alone. Still lifting it like a little bit, not a ton. I'm also not like super warmed up in like the front part of like my mask, my facial mask. That's a term that's used a lot. In order to get more of like a Broadway brassy sound, a lot of people go like, nay, 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 which is like very annoying, but also part of it. There's a reason why theater kids are annoying, because we are. But this is me singing with it being not only like connecting my breath a little bit more, which like all of it tends to help. Like if you are lifting your soft palate, then you're actually able to like get more air and resonance with your voice. It helps to kind of just like engage everything in too. But that's why we start with like breath control first with these singing lessons. So this is me lifting my soft palate. Midnight, not a sound from the pavement, as the moon lost her memory, she is smiling alone. I don't know if you could hear any difference there. I'm a little bit shy. I haven't been like singing in front of people for a long time. I haven't done this in years. But also hopefully being able to see that like even with training and stuff, if you've had experience like being on stage or not, that it can be a very vulnerable thing, and that like the process of learning and practicing, there should not be stigma behind it. That like we all have to start from somewhere, and that like where I can feel like all of the like shakiness in my voice, that's not always like how it can be perceived. We're also like our own worst critics and stuff. But hopefully, as we are engaging in this journey of singing lessons, I can hopefully show like there's no shame in trying things. And also hopefully see how my own voice improves with certain things. So anyway, thank you. But we'll keep working on things. And I'm also trying to... Hello, Stuart Little is my son. Thank you. This is why I think I should direct the musical Cats at some point. But I also am like annoying and I would want to do many things, like star in some things and like do some choreography. But even if it's just in my mind, it's a fun little exercise to be thinking about. But yeah, hopefully as we get along with these singing lessons, I'm also going to be doing more like practicing on my own, like practicing the exercises that we talk about and not even really going beyond those exercises, just to kind of like be an example, like practice what I'm preaching, literally, to hopefully see like if there are any improvements or like the process of using those things quite literally in practice, like how that actually changes your voice and your control and presentation. Okay. I'm done with that. Shall we move on to pet play? I'm very excited to be talking about pet play. Today I was like, I just want to be in the musical Cats. So, also like me liking pet play as an like a part of my personality, I think this also really lends itself to Cats. It's like it's such a niche thing, people who actually like the musical Cats. It's theater. It doesn't have a storyline. It's just humans dressing up as cats. This is why the CGI version was so egregious. It's supposed to be like whimsical with like human beings like pretending to be cats. Like that's like imagination and fun and also very kinky. And I also think I would want to do a version that was much more like club oriented. So we get some showgirls, the girls, gays and theys, the guys, the show people who know how to pole dance and also be on silks and like hoops. I think that would be very cool because I'm like, cats like are very elegant. I mean, not cats can be derpy, but also like I think that would be fun to show of like these elements of like why people who like cats are like engaging in pet play, like incorporating that in the musical. I think that's a huge part of why people like it, but also like there's so much untapped potential there. It would not be for the mainstream sensibility, but that's also why it would be good. I'm pretentious, but I'm also right. Oh, that's so annoying to say. Anyway, let's get into what Evie Lupine has to say. We have watched some of her content more recently about the phenomenon of choking and breath play, but more specifically the topic of non-consensual choking that has happened. So more recently, especially with like the rise in fascism. And she just has a lot of really great education overall with kink. And this is another part of the education that she talks about is pet play. I haven't seen Cats, but it'd be a good lens to view societal stratification of the in-group and out-group strays. Yes, exactly. And also, like, in Cats, the whole thing is that they don't have, like, owners. They are strays. So it's, like, street cats. And so, like, if they're street cats, why would we not incorporate, like, different kinds of music? Not just, like, Broadway, more classical leaning music that is classist a lot of the time, and instead incorporate more like the girlies, you know? Like we need strippers, and having them actually like in burlesque people who can like move in a very like feline way, like climbing poles and like being that kind of athletic type of person that like mimics what like cats can do. I'm like, okay, I need to have a word with Sir Andrew Lloyd Webber. Not like he would care, but anyway. These are my plans that I like have in my notes that I'm like, okay, I would do this. I also would love to do like costuming of like famous like cat portrayals of like icons, like different like Catwoman suits that have been iconic. I think that would be cool. Thumping cat bass and slam poetry in 2000s techno trance. Yeah, I would love that. Especially like change like and having like with scene changes and stuff, or like some of the slower, more like ballad types, that there would be like heavy bass and have more like R&B that I think would be really incredible too. Japanese happy hardcore has strong cat motif. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And how there is a lot of just like cultural traditions of people dressing up as animals, or like cat people, or even in like origin stories or myths and like different religions and traditions, that it's like there's a lot to tap into there that I think it's like the whole like CGI situation that they did a few years ago. It's like they got some talented people like Jennifer Hudson to sing the Memory song. I think, you know, she's an outstanding vocalist, but it was trying to appeal to the mainstream sensibility, and that's not what it is about. Like, there is a reason why everyone hated what was happening. And it's like, no, this is like, we can be using this as a vehicle for larger commentary, and also like engaging in like imagination and play, which is why like so many people like pet plays. Like, as an adult, actually being able to access these things that are like more closed off or like conditioned out of us, that you have to be sad and depressed. I mean, I know it's like oppressive systems and capitalism and shit, but that like imagination, like as you've said before in Arco Taco, like that is a way of like reconstructing the world around us, even if it is only in our minds. But then when we're able to like act it out, like that is a form of like creating the world that we want to see. Anyway, this is the deep cats conversation. But this is fun for me. Okay, so let's get into BDSM 101, pet play. She kind of goes into the different theories of why people like pet play, which she talks more about like the academic studies on pet players and like from her own personal experience. But to be clear, just to set the tone, people engage in kink and pet play for like as just any number of reasons. It's deeply personal and extremely diverse.
Hello, everyone. My name is Evie Lou Pine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today, I want to take us back to basics and cover something I haven't talked about in detail for years on my channel: pet play. That's right, we are going to get into everything you need to know to get started, from how to know what kind of pet you are to beginner-friendly scene ideas. Even if you think pet play might not be your thing, stick around, because you might be surprised just how many different kinks pet play can tap into. With that being said, though, let's start by defining what pet play is. I personally see pet play as a form of role play done in a BDSM context where one takes on the role or persona of a pet. And I realize this is a broad definition, but I picked it for a good reason. I find that discussions online about pet play tend to have more prescriptive views of what pet play has to be, sometimes without realizing that's what's happening. For example, stating that pet play always involves being in a power exchange relationship, that it has to be done with a partner, that it must be degrading, or that you have to take on the role of a specific animal while doing it. While all of these things can be true about the way that some people do pet play, none of these are a requirement for everyone across the board. So be wary if you're looking for information about this kink elsewhere online and you find statements like pet play is a type of dom-sub relationship or all pets are submissive or the like, because unless the statement is pet play requires consent first, there are always exceptions to those supposed rules, right? So I know that for me, when I was brand new to the BDSM community in 2015, which, oh my God, was almost 10 years ago now.
I've not done research, off the cuff thought. An exploration of self with primal connection and authoring an environment of safety and trust, but still adrenaline-inducing, one possible draw of pet play. Yeah, I think so too. Of like, yeah, being more animalistic, the psychological relief of not feeling like you are tied to human problems at times, like not exclusively, but like how it can be whimsical, it can be like a form of like a domination of like owner and pet, but also like a very like lazy thing for some people, that it also is like we are so desperate for escapism a lot of the time as adults, and we often find it through media and like social media platforms, like these entertainment platforms. And it is very radical to be going into a space that is more childlike in the way of not being reliant on all of these outer sources for entertainment, but like entertaining yourself, because you can do like, you know, solo pet play and stuff. But also if you're engaging with a partner, that it's like a very like direct connection, and that just is like a pro-social interaction of like actually having these experiences where like relationship and like care and like thinking about the other person and their consent and like being very in the moment, that can be sometimes like meditative and mindful, like practicing mindfulness, not only of like how you are doing, but like how another person is doing, that it is also this practice in empathy too, I think.
A lot of the information out there about pet play was inherently limiting. I was excited about the prospect of being a pet because it seemed really fun and seemed like it resonated with a side of myself I hadn't let out in a long time, but the way that people described it online was a little off-putting. Back then, many bloggers and educators talking about pet play had this old school mentality that all real pet play would be grounded in a 24/7, that is all the time, total power exchange relationship. A relationship where the submissive gives up all their power or authority to their dominant partner every day without restrictions. Pet play was then used as either a punishment tool to humiliate a submissive or to break them because, you know, it's so awful being a human being to being treated like an animal, like a pet, right? Yeah, it's so terrible. Or it was used as a way to reinforce the power disparity of the relationship. The D-type is this big, smart human, and the S-type is this silly, worthless little pet who isn't even good enough to be worthy of sitting on furniture or eating food from a plate at the table. If it's your thing, I do want to clarify though, this way of doing pet play is valid. This is a legitimate experience that many people do enjoy.
Exactly.
But it is far from the only way of doing this kind of role play.
It's like I can be very bratty in ways. I love engaging in brat behavior, and I think like, I mean, they're different, like all kinds of animals like have different kinds of like personalities and like different types of like archetypes, but like cats can be very sassy, not all cats, but like not being really held by a sense of authority. So there is this kind of like, it lends itself to a lot of different kinds of play. as well. Like, I think it lends itself very well to like bratty behavior of like, give me some rules that I should stick by, give me some rules that I can kind of like brat against, and that's super fun in my mind. And I know other people feel similarly, but you can also like have this different perspective of like, if you are wanting to be in a more dominant role, yeah, or like it can lend itself as well to people who are verse, and who switch from more like submissive or dominant behavior. But also I think like this is me advocating, like talking about my own like draw to like kitten play, where like it can also be very like dom behavior to be a cat that like is not wanting to be told what to do, you know?
For example, around a decade ago, when I was first getting into the scene, there was a new way of doing pet play that was gaining popularity. Rather than being about degradation, this form of pet play was more focused on the aesthetics and loving, positive power exchange, emphasizing caretaking. The pet wasn't just a lesser because of their position, they were cute, precious things worthy of protection. This era of pet play on social media was full of pastel-colored tails and skater skirts and ribbons and many
cute.
collars. So many collars. It was a lighter, less intense form of roleplay compared to what came before it as the dominant form. While it has since waned in popularity thanks to social media censorship, it's left an indelible mark on what people consider possible under the pet play label, which I do think is mostly a good thing. Though these two forms of pet play not only give us a sense of how different people do pet play, it also gives some examples of why people do it. Some people use it as an outlet for emotional sadomasochism. They like feeling humiliated and degraded by being forced into a pet role rather than choosing it because it represents some critical aspect of who they are or because it's fun for them to do. Other people enjoy being cared for as a beloved pet with lots of brushing and treats and praise. They find this to be an affirming, positive, building experience. For some, pet play is an outlet for self-expression and having fun. They see acting like a pet as a way to express their personality or as a way to enjoy the kinds of things they wouldn't be allowed to do or allowed to enjoy in their everyday human life. Being a pet can create a space for
Also in love
judgment-free
with
fun,
having a
whether by
fluid
chasing a
self
laser pointer or by
personally.
wrestling
Yeah,
with a toy.
expressing different
It can also
aspects
be
of self
a
is
massive
appealing.
stress reliever.
Mm-hmm.
Many people report that doing pet play allows them
Yeah,
to
of like always
unwind, get out of
having
their
to
heads,
feel
and stop
pressured to
thinking
present
so
as a
much
certain
about their
way.
everyday life worries. Like,
especially as someone like from my own, I think in general, it's like when you have personas, it's like that's still like part of who you are. And like there are certain things that are not as acceptable in society where it's like you can actually access your imagination in that way, and it's self-exploration and expression that is extremely validating and exciting. But also how like for me being a non-binary person, also like I think having some like pretty like switch tendencies of like exploring what that even means and like what compels you to want to feel more submissive or want to feel a little more dominant, and how there are like all of these different ways to have like gender expression throughout different personas that is extremely liberating. Like being a theater kid, that was one of the ways that I feel like I came to like learn how to like express more of my gender identity, is like what some people viewed as like dressing up or me being like Peter Pan in a show. Like that was very validating to my gender identity. But like that is an aspect of like actually exploring yourself and feeling like you can be freer than feeling like you have to conform to all of these systems that tell you who you are.
whether they're gonna make pasta or tacos for dinner, or that they need to remember to pay that bill when they get home. The same is often said, not just by people who are pets, but by those who play with them, often called owners or handlers. They also say that pet play can be a way to relax and just enjoy themselves with a partner without regular life stuff getting in the way all the time. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the obvious fact that for many, pet play is also a turn-on. One only needs to look at the popularity of butt-plug pet tales in mainstream adult stories to see that it can also just be a sex thing. And no, by By the way, there is no correlation whatsoever between wanting to do pet play in the bedroom with another human adult and wanting to do something with an actual animal. The two are totally separate. Bedroom pet play tends to be more about eroticizing the archetypal characteristics we associate with those animals, like the playfulness of a puppy, alongside the power imbalance inherent in such interactions, rather than trying to replicate and substitute for something that would otherwise be a crime. I know some people will just
and
not believe me
immoral
when I say the two are completely
bestiality
unrelated,
is what
but
she's
not just
describing.
me saying this. There has never been any correlation in any of the research I have read that says an interest in one leads to an interest in the other. They are two totally separate things as far as our current science is concerned, and I feel like that research is fairly adequate, and I don't know any mainstream sex psychologists that would argue to the contrary. So maybe now it is starting to make sense why people like this whole pet roleplay thing. You can understand how it might be relaxing. After all, maybe at one point you too liked playing pretend, and one day you were suddenly too grown up to keep doing it. And pet play might be a way to recapture that spirit of imagination as an adult. Or maybe you like humiliation, and the idea of being a pet eating scraps off the floor is precisely your kind of thing. But now you have to stop and ask yourself a few things. How do you do pet play? And what kind of pet do you want to be? Traditionally in BDSM, we have three major subtypes of pet play: pony play, kitten play, and puppy play. Puppy play is associated
Power
with the gay
dynamics
men's
is not
community,
inherent,
but
but
anyone,
maybe
including
that's
yours
just
truly,
called
can be a puppy.
furries.
Kitten play has historically been popular with younger female
like furries don't engage in power exchange as much. I do view furries as being a part of BDSM as kink, as like it's a type of persona, a fursona, that anything that is just not really in the mainstream. Because I think a lot of the time when we think of BDSM and kink, it primarily focuses on power exchange, but it doesn't necessarily have to be all the time. Of like, you can have like two pet players where you don't have one who's in more of like a dominant or a submissive role, but they're just like wanting to like play together. And that's more of like coming from equal ground. Is that what you were describing? Or am I misunderstanding?
And is the newest out of the three to gain prominence. Pony play is likely
As in there
to
can
be
be
the oldest,
equal
thanks to its representation
standing
in popular erotic
exploration.
novels like
Oh,
Anne
okay,
Rice's
okay.
Sleeping Beauty trilogy and adult alternative artwork like the
Both
stuff
are
featured in
expressing
early Bizarre magazine
animalistic. Where's the
illustrations.
power?
It also tends to
Okay,
be the most evenly
interesting.
split across genders and has appeal in the gay men's, lesbians, and pansexual /
Okay.
heterosexual BDSM scenes. But rest assured, picking out what
Yeah,
kind of pet
that's a
you want to
thought.
be is
I
not
feel
like
like
picking your starter.
that should be like a survey that's done among kinksters of like, does kink always have to be about power exchange? Or yeah, because I think that's like mostly the idea behind it, or why people are drawn to it, especially with like the even just like the acronym of BDSM of like bondage, dominance, submission, sadomasochism, masochism, like all of these things, that's why people are drawn in to begin with. But yeah, there is this element of like role play and personas that can lend itself to that, but also can exist outside of it too, at least in my mind. But it would be interesting to see like a survey done to see what like a lot of kinksters think about it.
Pokemon at the beginning of a new Pokemon game. You aren't locked out of the other choices forever, and you aren't necessarily constrained to these three either. While ponies, puppies, and kittens are the most common, many other types of pets do exist. Some people prefer to roleplay as other barnyard or farm animals like pigs or cows, while still taking on that quintessentially pet role. I've also met people who are bunnies, foxes, coyotes, wolves, raccoons, red pandas, ravens, possums, mice, bats, lizards, parrots, you name it, even a dragon. If it makes sense to you and you feel like a pet while you do it, congrats! You're doing pet play. You can be one type of pet with one partner and a different kind with someone else. You can change which one you most identify with over time or identify as more than one species simultaneously. There are no hard and fast rules when it comes to this part of it. If you want to be a hybrid bunny cat one day and a puppy the next, go for it. You have my permission. But I understand that having it be so open-ended can be a little less than helpful when you're just starting and you might want some guidance. So how do you know what type of
sex
pet
as
you would enjoy being the
self-exploration with
most?
others.
I know when I first
Entirely
started, there
possible.
was a
Not
lot
claiming
of
as
gendered
truth, but yeah,
assumptions
survey
about
would
pet
be
play.
cool.
Girls were always
Yeah,
kittens
and
and
even
boys
how
were always
like
puppies. Heaven
even
help you
outside
if you did
of
not fit into the
like a
gender
sexual
binary, or if you
context of
didn't
just
like either
wanting
one
to
of those two
engage in like
options. There was simply
scenes
nothing out there
and
unless you wanted to do
play
some kind of
of like how it
humiliation,
doesn't have
pig play
to
type
like
situation. For
necessarily
the
have
first few
this
days after I discovered
inherent
pet play and
sexual
decided I
quality
wanted to
to
try
it.
it for myself, I just assumed I would be a kitten because I didn't see any other options for women, which sucked. So I am here to tell you right now, you can be any kind of pet you want, regardless of your gender identity or your sexual orientation. Don't let anyone tell you differently. I have met plenty of cis men
Yes,
who are kittens
I love
and
that
girls
she's
like
saying
me
that
who are
to
puppies,
people.
and more than a few non-binary ponies and foxes. But that also unfortunately
Well,
means gender is not a great way to narrow down what kind of pet you might be. So
mm-hmm.
instead, I recommend going off of your personality characteristics, what draws you to kink, and the archetypes we commonly associate with
Just
certain
cognitive
animals.
play.
For example,
Yeah,
a
exactly.
pony may be strong-willed, like an unbroken wild stallion, or they may be a gentle giant who feels great satisfaction from hard labor. A kitten may have high energy, be mischievous, or be prissy and demanding, like an ill-tempered young royal. Or they could even be a lazy cat who lives for napping in someone's lap all day long. A puppy may be playful and silly, or a loyal working dog who needs a complex task to feel satisfied. They may also embody the idea of man's best friend, always willing to be there for you when you need a snuggle or a friendly face lick. Do any of these resonate with your own personality?
I'm
Do any of
eating
these match
greasy
with how a friend
breakfast
might
and
describe you?
compressing
Are
language.
you bratty, naughty, obedient, a
Well,
good
hopefully
listener,
that
or
will
a hard
help with
worker?
your
Do any of these
hangover.
things match on to how we anthropomorphize pets? Do
I'm
you
eating
maybe see a bit of
pistachios.
yourself in the shy, reserved bunny or the noble, hard-to-tame wolf?
I fucking
Hopefully
love
these give you an idea of where to
pistachios.
start, and it should be just a starting point. As anyone with actual pets can tell you, animals have their own unique personalities. I've been around dogs that acted like cats, and cats that acted more like dogs. Just because you might see yourself as mischievous doesn't mean you have to be a kitten, for example, if that doesn't sit right with you. Naughty foxes, ponies, raccoons, and puppies do also exist. And if you are still completely stuck at this point, a few things might be going on. One, you might relate more to a hybrid animal. Maybe you aren't quite a puppy, but a wolf dog is about right. Or you might vibe more with a less conventional animal like a dragon or a pet bird. It's also important to remember that not every pet is submissive. I have a separate video discussing this in detail, so I will keep my explanation here short. However, being a pet animal may not feel right if you think about it from a submissive or bottom perspective. But when you switch things around, I guess literally in this case, to start thinking about it from being a dominant or a toppy pet, it might begin to click for you. Maybe you aren't a bratty kitten at all, but a regal queen cat who is the boss of her domain. Or maybe you're the alpha mare of a herd of horses and you only want to play with other ponies. Or you may want to be a pet in the sense of being a kept companion and you don't feel like trying to roleplay being a specific type of animal. That is also a valid approach. While less common, being a human pet is also a thing where instead of acting like, say, a dog or a cat, you retain your internal sense of being human while taking on or being made to take on the social role of being a pet. One of the best things about pet play that I hope is coming across in this video is that it is a highly individual experience, and you get to decide how you do it, not anyone else. And so, moving on from that, once you have an idea of the type of pet you'd like to be, you might wonder to yourself, of course, okay, so I need to have a partner now to do this with, right? Or maybe you already have a partner and you want to know what they can do to help you as a brand new pet. And oh boy, do I have some ideas for you. First, I want to talk about some of the common ways people actually do pet play in the community because surprisingly, this is actually not a kink that requires you to have a partner. Yeah, you can do pet play totally solo. This is sometimes called being a stray or an unowned pet, but I don't always love that terminology since it sort of implies that the right state of being a pet is to have a partner. And while that might be true for some individuals, I don't want people overall to feel lesser or other if they decide that their pet side is something they want to keep just to themselves or only do in groups with friends. So I prefer just to say solo pet instead. I think it's a little bit more open-ended that way. Community activities are also an important part of pet play. Whether you have a partner or not, many pets, especially puppies and ponies, like congregating with each other. This can take on the form of a mosh, usually a non-sexual, play-focused hangout where puppies get together with toys and play with each other. Or it might be more like a herd where ponies and other types of pets roam around outside, go on trail rides, jump over obstacles, and the like.
Yeah, like what she's describing about like these like play parties of like having a mosh or a little herd, like a little pride of cats, a pounce of cats. That's so fun. People just like being able to hang out together and be in like a safe space physically and mentally to engage in this kind of play is so fun.
BDSM play spaces also sometimes host petting zoo events, where all kinds of pets and animal role players can sign up to stay in an area and get attention from other kinksters. For the truly dedicated, some groups even host hunt events, where human handlers and pets work together to chase quarry through the fields or the woods. The fact that there are so many different ways for pets to hang out together in our community is one of my favorite things about pet play. It is a great
Yeah, Evie, so she said this earlier, but this is what got her into the kink community in general, or just like interested in BDSM, is pet play. That like at first she identified as a kitten because it was more gendered. There wasn't as much information on like puppy play and stuff, especially for people who are femme or assigned female at birth. But now that has changed. She also regularly like plans hunts, well, that she was just describing, of like someone who is in a more dominant role chasing someone who's in a more submissive role, that it engages in primal play. So like what you were describing, Taco, of like how it accesses this like very primal instinct, where people like to feel like they are prey, but like in a consensual manner where there is a predator chasing after them. And she was like, and it doesn't even mean that it like has to be a sexual thing as well, like how any form of kink doesn't have to be sexual. Of like, she mentioned when she was planning her own hunt that she was like, an ideal thing for me is like to be running away from someone, like the thrill of the chase, quite literally, and then when they catch me, just getting like a little kiss on the forehead. I'm like, that is so sweet. But also like a great example of how it doesn't have to be limiting to people's ideas of what it should or shouldn't be.
Not just to get to know your local BDSM scene, but also to make friends and have some judgment-free physical fun in a safe space. But group play is not going to be for everyone, and that's totally fine. You know, I am more of a lapdog type myself, and I can be overwhelmed in high-energy group spaces. So what can you do if you're someone who prefers to do pet play one-on-one rather than in a group setting? Lots of things. For puppies, activities like playing with toys and playing fetch are common. If it's not entirely clear at this point, the average pet play scene, by the way, usually involves being on your knees, though lots of ponies do stay bipedal, and scrambling around on all fours. Trick training using treats is also a very popular choice alongside leash training. Just like other forms of training in kink, this is a scene type where you are teaching the pet the proper way to do something. Some pets are quick learners and pick up on things immediately, whereas others must be trained repeatedly, over and over and over again, almost like they don't actually want to learn what they're doing. Sort of like the pet version of doing position training. Ponies do similar training activities, such as learning dressage, role-playing being broken, or training how to pull carts or jump over obstacles. Kittens often enjoy chasing after toys as well, or they use things like laser pointers. And pets of all kinds tend to enjoy grooming and getting treats. This could be as simple as calling your partner a good pet while you stroke their head, or as complicated as doing a full-on grooming scene where you wrestle them into a tub and you bathe them and you comb them and you style their hair and maybe even trim it if you're extra bold. And sometimes, even despite all the different activities that we can do in pet play, the most satisfying form of it is doing almost nothing at all. Just putting on some gear and curling up on a pillow or blanket on the floor at your partner's feet while they play video games or do a puzzle or watch a movie or something. And by the way, quick aside here, gear is the equipment that pet players wear to outwardly look more like the pet they're trying to play as or to enhance their headspace. This can include things like fur tails, ears, collars, masks, hoods, harnesses, and even pommets. I've avoided talking about gear too much up to this point because people can get really fixated on it, and to be honest, you don't need it to do pet play, and I myself rarely use it these days. You don't have to have gear to enjoy pet play, but it is something that many people use to enhance their play and separate their everyday self or other types of identities from their pet self more easily. Plus, you know, it looks pretty cute. And in any case, if none of these forms of play appeal to you, don't worry about it. There are so many ways to do pet play, including ways that overlap with kinks you may already enjoy. We've already discussed humiliation and degradation a few times now, but on the opposite side of the spectrum, praise kink and pet play go together like peanut butter and jelly. The phrase good pet was made for this. Honestly, the quickest way to know if you like pet play is to see how you respond to that phrase. And as far as other types of role play go, DDLG
I did something
and
right.
CGL often get combined with pet play,
telling
either
me.
through literally sharing dungeon nights together or through folks who enjoy doing both, doing one and then the other, even fusing their headspaces together. If you're already a little Why not try playing dress up as a kitten, or see what it feels like to play as a baby puppy and not just a human baby? You can also combine things like service with pet play too. After all, we often train animals to do things for us. Maybe that's through the stereotypical, Fido fetches slippers and morning paper routine, or maybe you learn how to do more complicated things like turning on and off light switches on command. How limited this is by a biological animal's actual capacity for doing tasks is up to you. I've even seen people take on a more emotional support animal role, or even a service animal type role. In one of my first pet play relationships, my partner had type 1 diabetes, and we joked that I was kind of becoming their diabetic alert dog because I was learning about the signs that might mean they should check their blood sugar levels. But regardless, the best way to get started is by trying out whatever form of play appeals the most to you. If you need to build up your confidence first, which a lot of people have to, there is no shame in practicing what it feels like to walk around on all fours in the privacy of your bedroom, or try out your barks or meows in the shower or in the car by yourself. Don't plan for anything too elaborate at first when you begin planning scenes. Just do a simple thing or two and see what it feels like. Maybe have your partner feed you by hand and stroke your hair while calling you a good pup or a good kitten. Put a big pillow on the floor and pretend it's your pet bed while you watch a nature documentary together. It might be a little awkward at first, but with time, it will feel more comfortable if pet play is the right fit for you. And you might also want to experiment with different pet headspaces, different types of gear. Just really try things out and see what, if anything, is going to best tap into your pet headspace if you have one. I know that there are topics I did not quite fit into this video because I knew if I talked about them, it would add an extra 15 minutes to the runtime. So I didn't talk about things like getting into pet headspace or pet space. I have a video that's kind of recent where I talk about that alongside other kind of special forms of subspace you can watch down below. And also, I didn't really talk about how pet play and power exchange work together because that's a huge topic. And if you all want to see a specific video on pet play and power exchange, I would love to make it. So let me know if you want to see that one in a comment down below. And I also want to add onto this as well here because I realize kind of listening to everything that I said now, I want to make sure that it's really clear that regardless not just of your gender or your sexual orientation, but also your mobility level, if you use mobility aids, if you're in a wheelchair, pet play is also very much something that you can do. Everything can be modified to accommodate you and your needs. And if somebody tells you that oh, you can't do pet play because you're in a wheelchair, or somebody tells you, you can't do pet play because you have a visual impairment, that is, I can't say the word that I want to say on YouTube, but that is bull. And I am very sorry if anyone says that to you. That's not true. The pet play community is such, and it should be, a very vibrant, wide open space for people of all different kinds. And it's what I really, really love about the pet play community on top of everything else that I love about it. I just want it to continue to be an open space where people don't feel like they can't do something or shouldn't do something because of some aspect about who they are. But with that being said, that is everything I wanted to go over today. Thank you all so much for listening to me ramble about pet play for such a long time. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Any other videos you want to see about pet play, either specific videos and different types of pet play, other kind of subtypes of pet play in terms of again, that power exchange and pet play intersection, I'd love to know your thoughts about anything else you want to see from me in a comment down below. Happy to talk about all that. I'd also love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this one in a comment down below. If you're not already and you would like to, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all different kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best you can do that is with Patreon. Link to that will be down below. If you do already swim over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time,
I love her
I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.
I realized the other day when we were watching an Evie Lupine video that I was like, oh, I think my outro that I do of wishing people a good rest of their day or evening, that's very similar to her. Not like it's exclusive, that's a common thing to say, but giving credit to Evie. Also, thank you for becoming a patron, Taco. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, I will be getting out more content. I have been wanting to watch a Che Guevara documentary and post it there because I think there would be a very big copyright strike if I post it to YouTube or anywhere else. And then also, when I finally get around to, well, I guess I'm already starting to do this, but when I actually am done with choreographing my number of WAP, wet ass pussy, but with a kitten perspective, a kitten version, I will be uploading that to Patreon. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Okay, moving into Culture Corner quickly. I did want to show this that I found that I mentioned at the beginning of the stream. This is the New York City Ballet. And I have mentioned before, but I grew up doing ballet. I have a conflicted relationship with it. I was put in ballet at the age of 3. It naturally is not what like my body does. I think as a kid I liked it more because I had like a child body, and then once I started going through puberty, being assigned female at birth, it was a distressing experience being like, oh, I guess I'm not right for this, but also that's just kind of the culture of making people feel like they have to have a certain body type, and that's just not the case. Anyone can and should be engaging in ballet. But there is plenty of shaming and abuse that goes on in these spaces that a lot of my dancer friends, like, we have so many stories of the kinds of things that like teachers would tell us of like going through and telling each person like why their body is not right to be a professional dancer, or some people even putting like thumbtacks in their shoes like under the arch of your foot so that you weren't walking with flat feet. And like, I'm Indian, I have flat feet. Like, that's just like the truth of the matter. And so like that was like the bane of my existence, feeling like I had like tits and an ass that I was like having to deal with and like balance with. I wasn't as like aerodynamic in many ways, but also like having flat feet, that was a challenge. So like it morphed over time, but I think especially now as an adult, like I can still very much appreciate the art form itself and how much beauty is in it. Like, to be clear, it is very classist, and that like it is a privilege even to be able to like afford to take lessons, that they have become even more expensive than what they were when I was taking ballet lessons. That it is expensive to, especially when you get to be on point, which like I did, when you have point shoes, they are very expensive. And as you are like wanting to pursue a career, like sometimes these shoes can be like $200, and like professional dancers, they don't pay for their own shoes. Like companies pay for their shoes, but like that is where a large part of the money goes, is for them to actually have shoes, because they can wear out a pair of shoes like in one night, especially if they're a principal dancer, like a soloist. So I'm trying to find out when this was published, but it's not showing for some reason. So the New York City Ballet, visits by the New York City Ballet. Okay. Hobbies are almost always money pits in my experience. I know. It's so frustrating. Which is why, like, as we're talking about kink, and like why I'm glad that Evie didn't focus on like gear and stuff as much, that like that can be the focus on having to pay a lot of money for things rather than just like engaging in behavior. And why I'm like, I still engage in play and I don't have kitten ears. So like that doesn't mean the experience is any less, you know? But yeah, most of the time things can just be so expensive. Like this is one of the opening pages. This is when they, like their back leg up here, they are in arabesque. That is a position. They have their arms up that are being held by partners behind them. I don't know if you can see that very well. Principal dancers, Jacques d'Amboise and Suzanne Farrell. So I think this was like in the early 70s. Wait, here we go. Look at her makeup. Stunning. They don't make shit like this anymore. It's like playbills that have a million ads in them. Anthony Bloom. So this headpiece is so pretty. Jelana. Like if you can see what she's doing there. So pretty. And you had more photographers that actually had training in ballet themselves. It was viewed as more of like an art form, not as much of like an advertising mechanism. Not to say that like it still wasn't that. This is Allegra Kent. Beautiful. Conrad Ludlow. You can see her. She has like the little headpiece for being in Swan Lake. There was one ballet in her tutu, very pretty. There was one ballet that I was in, like growing up, we would do recitals every year. And I was like a gray goose at one point, but we got to do like these like very like pretty like Swan Lake arms, like flapping and stuff, and like doing this, and it was very fun because like very few people actually get to be in like not only wearing a tutu but also wearing like the feathery headpieces that are very iconic. And tutus are reserved for soloists a lot of the time, not exclusively, but they're very protected because they're like, if you can't dance well, you need to be able to hide some of that shit. That's like what some of the rationale is, honestly. So this is Edward Vieira. Like, he's also beautiful. Look at all like the shadows and the lighting is so pretty. And this is Patricia McBride. Again, her makeup, stunning. Mimi Paul and Arthur Mitchell. Ooh. We actually have a black man on the company, the New York City Ballet, which was not as common at the time. Which isn't to say that like more people shouldn't have had more opportunities, because that can also be true, or is also true. This is Violette Verdi and Nicholas Magallanes, I think. Very pretty. I'm so glad I found this. This is Francisco Moncion. So here he isn't shown as doing as like difficult of dancing, like these positions and steps that some of these other people were doing, but that's okay. Then we're getting like a timeline of the New York City Ballet from 1916 to 1966. Oh, maybe this was published in 1966 then. I guess that would make more sense with the makeup. Yeah, that like with the wings and like the eyeliner that's like slightly below the eye. I mean, that's very typical of like ballet type of makeup anyway, but more of like the 60s like beauty queen makeup, as we saw. This is very sassy. Costumes are fun. We have these partner pictures. This very long dress, which is pretty. Dancers make some great models of just understanding like positions and like making shapes, like with your body, having like awareness with bodies. Whoa, this one's intense. She's like doing a back bend. This is not that common of people to do, but also this looks like it's a rehearsal, them just in their leotards, not actually in costume. More photos there. There's some appropriation there with Cleopatra. I mean, the makeup is beautiful, but yeah, this like line below the eyes that was like popularized in the 60s, that has stayed with a lot of professional ballet dancers. It's to make your eyes look a lot bigger. 60s, so interesting aesthetically. Rigid, violent 50s transition. Yeah. Yeah, not so soft. Like the makeup is like stronger lines, especially. Okay, so now we're getting soloists because they divide in ballet, they divide up the dancers of like principal dancers versus soloists. Principal dancers are the ones that like they're top tier. They usually are ones who get like these lead roles in ballets. They like there can be a lot of favoritism, nepotism, of course, but they tend to just kind of shuffle around as to like who has like the lead roles in a particular ballet. Soloists are people who are kind of working up to that, where they will still, like as the name says, have like a solo in a dance, or it will be like a group number where they're not part of the ensemble or like the core, but they still have like solo moments, and they often do partner dancing with people. But something that a lot of people don't know unless you come from this world is that people don't really say like ballerina. That used to be a term that was exclusive for like the top female dancer, and that would not be used for anyone else. So it's very like hierarchical in nature, of course, very elitist. But when people say like, oh, this is a ballerina, like, you know, that's not someone who actually is like seriously engaged in ballet in many ways. So more photos here. Yeah, this is way beyond like getting a playbill for the New York City Ballet. I was so stoked to find this. I can't believe this was just like sitting in an antique store in Utah somewhere. Like, she has a little crown on top of her head. I wonder if this is Alice in Wonderland. So, like, this teeny little one that, like, the Queen of Hearts often wears. More of the staff. Yeah, the photographer is phenomenal. More of the timeline. Like doing this, what they call like a stag, this type of jump. These things are very difficult to do, but they make it look very easy. More of the ensemble, what they're calling the repertory. More here as well. Yeah, that's the end. Then we get these people in the back. I love when you have dancers, like, they not only can do these very difficult things with their bodies of just being like incredible athletes, but they also are good actors. I think that can be more difficult to find. The dancing itself is often more prioritized. But when I was younger, I remember seeing Romeo and Juliet, the ballet, at the Capitol Theater in Utah, in Salt Lake City. The Ballet West company that I danced with for like 5 years. Like, I wasn't part of the company, but they put on the Nutcracker every year, and I did that for 5 years in like various roles that they allow kids outside of the company to audition for. And that was like I've yet to be in as rigorous or intense of an audition process as what I went through there. And I was exposed to that at like the age of 8. And so that like really prepped me for the rest of like auditioning in life. Like nothing was as intense as that experience, which is saying a lot. Okay, let's see. I think I was gonna play some songs, but just as the night is getting along, I do think I want to get more into the reading of the address of the Central Committee to the Central Committee of the Communist League. There we go. That's what that is. Okay, if I can put my gloves on the right way. I'm wanting to eventually get some gloves that have claws on them. I think that would be cute. Ooh. I'm wanting to do that for sure before I like record this number that I'm doing. Okay, so we left at... Where did we leave? Okay, they're talking about the Democratic Party, which is far more dangerous to workers than the previous liberal one. So this is still very relevant of talking about like what kinds of enemies and allies, supposed allies, there are when we are faced with the ruling class and the petty bourgeois essentially just kind of shuffling around and becoming more savvy of enemies to workers and unionizing and revolutionary movements. So this is partly what it has been calling out. Okay. Now, after their defeat, all these factions call themselves Republicans or Reds, just as the Republican petty bourgeois in France now call themselves socialists. Whereas in Wittenberg, Bavaria, etc., they still find opportunity to pursue their aims constitutionally. They seize the occasion to retain their old phrases and to prove by deeds that they have not changed in the least. It is evident, moreover, that the altered name of this party does not make the slightest difference in its attitude to the workers, but merely proves that they are now obliged to turn against the bourgeoisie, which is united with absolutism, and to seek support in the proletariat. The petty bourgeois Democratic Party in Germany is very powerful. It comprises not only the great majority of the bourgeois inhabitants of the towns, the small people in industry and trade and the guild masters, it numbers among its followers also the peasants and the rural proletarian, insofar as the latter has not yet found a support in the independent urban proletariat. The relation of the Revolutionary Workers' Party to the petty bourgeois Democrats is this. It marches together with them against the faction which it aims at overthrowing. It opposes them in everything, whereby they seek to consolidate their position in their own interests. Far from desiring to revolutionize all society for the revolutionary proletarians, the democratic petty bourgeois strive for a change in social conditions, by means of which existing society will be made as tolerable and as comfortable as possible for them. Yes. Hence, they demand above all diminution of state expenditure by curtailment of the bureaucracy and shifting the chief taxes onto the big landowners and bourgeois. Yeah, so when we're talking about progressive tax policies, talking about how like we need to get to a point where like people are taxed out of a class, and how like it can't just be done through taxing. I mean, certainly that would help with making it so some people don't have as much power, but that like these systems that are built to make that even possible also need to be dismantled. And that many people who think of just reforming them often don't take into account that once people are part of the system, that they often become part of the problem, and that any type of reform that is pursued is a lot of the time not, it doesn't go far enough. We need to dissolve the illusion of separation, left, right, top, bottom, and expose power. Yeah, that often is what makes it so we are kept oppressed and propagandized, is this idea that like we don't have that much in common with one another. Rather, like at the same time acknowledging that there are certain groups of people who have been hurt more than others by these systems, and that there needs to be compensation for this, that is a huge part of collective solidarity and liberation, but that we all have a lot more to be fighting for. At the same time, recognizing that, like, especially like as I've been more involved with like some organizing that is like outside of labor itself, that there are some people that are very resistant to having their minds be changed at all, and also to be using these mechanisms for their own like self-aggrandizement rather than actually fighting for collective liberation, and that it can be helpful to also understand where our energy is best used, or like how I was talking about earlier of like certain messengers, like me being like a non-binary contrarian like in many ways, that just me being in a space, I'm not always the best messenger when it comes to like persuading certain kinds of people when like they are not willing to hear what I have to say from the beginning. So like holding that as well, of like there are certain people who are easier to be organizing with and doing like direct action with, and that we need to be careful about who we are choosing to be on our side so that they are not these opposition parties or like plants, but recognizing that we still need to be working towards having this kind of education. People do not change minds. It's asking them to transgress self. It's ego death in a way. Yeah, it's true. And this is why we see how like most of the time people don't care about anything really unless it affects themselves personally, and that even rarer if they see it affect someone that they love, because that's not always the case. A lot of the time people don't even care then until they like feel the personal consequences of this kind of stuff. And so that's why it's like that has to be that type of transgression or violation of the self that people will, I think especially people who are like resistant to anarchist thought, are not feeling these like personal consequences of being failed by these systems. And that it's like they have been still in many ways, but they don't view it as hurting them personally or like as blatantly as what like other people have. The relation of the Revolutionary Workers' Party to the petty bourgeois Democrats is this. It marches together with them against the faction which it aims at overthrowing. It opposes them in everything, whereby they seek to consolidate their position in their own interests. Far from desiring to revolutionize all society for the revolutionary proletarians, the democratic petty bourgeois strive for a change in social conditions, by means of which existing society will be made as tolerable and comfortable as possible for them. Hence, they demand above all diminution of the— wait, I already read that. Sorry, I just got lost in that. Oh, here we go. Further, they demand the abolition of the pressure of big capital on small, through public credit institutions and laws against usury, by which means it will be possible for them and the peasants to obtain advances, on favorable conditions, from the state instead of from the capitalists. They also demand the establishment of bourgeois property relations in the countryside by the complete abolition of feudalism. To accomplish all this, they need a democratic state structure, either constitutional or republican, that will give them and their allies, the peasants, a majority. Sorry, I thought I skipped a line. Give them and their allies, the peasants, a majority, also a democratic communal structure that will give them direct control over communal property and over a series of functions now performed by the bureaucrats. So this is also kind of like warning, almost like a libertarian warning against like the co-opting of like federal programs that are that can be co-opted by bad actors. People aren't static, though their perception of self is kind of installed by their environment without much reflection. Yeah, it's good to acknowledge that human beings are dynamic, that people are capable of change, but also that, like, it is rare for anyone to be, like, persuaded of anything, and that a lot of the time it has to come from, like, their own personal experience rather than even just, like, hearing someone say something, that they have to be, like, that's the only way for someone to have their mind be changed, is for them to be engaging with it on a very personal level. And also, hopefully, like, at least in my mind, like, if people are exposed to more kinds of things and history and education where it's not, there aren't all of these barriers put up that are very classist, that, like, hopefully it's easier to see what we have in common and why this collective struggle is necessary. The domination and speedy increase of capital is further to be counteracted partly by restricting the right of inheritance and partly by transferring as many jobs of work as possible to the state. As far as the workers are concerned, it remains certain above all that they are to remain wage workers as before. The democratic petty bourgeois only desire better wages and a more secure existence for the workers, and hope to achieve this through partial employment by the state and through charity measures, yes, which is what many people call the shadow state, and how that is viewed as, what was the exact term that we were reading before? Middle class socialism. In short, they hope to bribe the workers by more or less concealed alms and to break their revolutionary potency by making their position tolerable for the moment. The demands of the petty bourgeois democracy here summarized are not put forward by all of its factions at the same time, and only a very few members of them consider that these demands constitute definite aims in their entirety. The further separate individuals or factions among them go, the more of these demands will they make their own, and those few who see their own program in what has been outlined above might believe that thereby they have put forward the utmost that can be demanded from the revolution. Yeah, these concessions and making it so that people are more comfortable rather than feeling a need to resist the entire system. But these demands can in no wise suffice for the party of the proletariat. While the democratic petty bourgeois wish to bring the revolution to a conclusion as quickly as possible, and with the achievement, at most, of the above demands, it is our interest and our task to make the revolution permanent, until all more or less possessing classes have been forced out of their position of dominance, until the proletariat has conquered state power, and the association of proletarians, not only in one country, but in all the dominant countries of the world, has advanced so far that competition among the proletarians of these countries has ceased, and that at least the decisive productive forces are concentrated in the hands of the proletarians, of seizing the means of production. For us, the issue cannot be the alteration of private property, but only its annihilation, not the smoothing over of class antagonisms, but the abolition of classes, not the improvement of existing society, but the foundation of a new one. That during the further development of the revolution, the petty bourgeois democracy will for a moment obtain predominating influence in Germany is not open to doubt. The question, therefore, arises as to what the attitude of the proletariat, and in particular of the League, will be in relation to it. 1. During the continuance of the present conditions where the petty bourgeois democrats are likewise oppressed. 2. In the next revolutionary struggle, which will give them the upper hand. 3. After this struggle, during the period of preponderance over the overthrown classes and the proletariat. Okay. We still have a few pages. I think that's where I'm going to have to end today. And then we will most likely finish this next Monday. And then after, for literature story time, this was requested by Tan that we read Othello, and me being a Shakespeare nerd. Shakespeare nerd. I think that's a great idea, especially as we're reading The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, that she also wrote a play called Desdemona, and Desdemona is a character in Othello. So I would love to maybe like look at these things at the same time to help provide more like decolonized context to Othello that I think Toni Morrison will be able to do an excellent job at. I have not read or seen Desdemona, the play that she wrote, but I've heard it's just astounding, which, you know, that's just what her art is. So are we surprised? Not really. Anyway, I think that's going to be it for me today. Thank you for being here. It was wonderful chatting with you, and thank you for all of the information and education that I was able to learn from you and engage with. That is my favorite part about streaming. Not to sound annoying, but it's true. Peace, power, love, and rage. Amazing. Yeah, thank you for being here. I hope you have a good rest of your day, evening, wherever you are, and I will see you soon. Okay, bye.